How to reduce cost in Azure Cloud by 40%. Hi there. Today we'll talk about how to reduce cost in Azure Cloud by 40%. We'll cover everything you need to know about how to reduce cost in Azure Cloud. So, let's get started. Why Azure Cloud costs get out of hand for SMBs. Most SMBs arrive in Azure through a path of convenience. A developer spins up a virtual machine, a second one follows for a test environment, and before long you have 20 VMs running at full capacity around the clock, most of them underutilized. This pattern, known as cloud sprawl, is the single biggest driver of wasted Azure spend. Three specific behaviors tend to inflate bills the most. Idle and oversized resources, VMs left running overnight or on weekends with little or no real workload. Pay-as-you-go defaults. Most teams never move off on-demand pricing, even for predictable workloads where Azure reserved instances would cut costs by 40 to 72%. Unmanaged data storage, blobs, disks, and log files accumulating in premium storage tiers when standard would work just as well. According to Flexera's 2025 State of the Cloud report, organizations waste an average of 28% of their cloud spend. For SMBs with fewer governance controls, that figure is consistently higher. Understanding where money leaks is the first step toward fixing it. Azure Reserved Instances, the fastest way to reduce Azure cloud costs. Azure Reserved Instances, RIs, are 1-year or 3-year commitments to use a specific VM type and region in exchange for discounts of up to 72% compared to pay-as-you-go pricing. For any workload that runs consistently, such as a production web server, a database, or a background processing queue, reserved instances are the single highest impact change you can make to reduce Azure cloud spend. Here is how the numbers compare for common SMB workloads. VM type pay-as-you-go, monthly, 1-year RI, monthly, 3-year RI, monthly, D2SV3, 2 vCPUs, 8 GB RAM, $140, $88, 37% off, $67, 52% off, D4SV3, 4 vCPUs, 16 GB RAM, $280, $176, 37% off, $134, 52% off, E8SV3, 8 vCPUs, 64 GB RAM, $504, $302, 40% off, $217, 57% off, estimates based on East US region pricing. Actual prices vary by region and VM series. The key rule for SMBs: only buy reserved instances for resources you are confident will run for the full commitment period. For variable or experimental workloads, pay-as-you-go or spot instances are better options. Azure also allows you to exchange or cancel reserved instances with certain conditions, which reduces the risk of overcommitting. Microsoft's Azure Reserved VM Instances pricing page covers the full VM catalog with current regional pricing. For a practical purchasing walkthrough, our guide on reducing cloud costs by 40% with Azure Reserved Instances walks through the full purchase and management process. How to reduce Azure cloud costs with autoscaling. Azure autoscaling adjusts compute capacity up or down based on actual demand, so you stop paying for resources that sit idle during low traffic periods. For variable workloads, autoscaling is one of the most effective ways to reduce Azure cloud costs without changing anything about your application code. Azure offers two primary autoscaling options for SMBs. Azure Virtual Machine Scale Sets, VMSS automatically increases or decreases the number of VM instances based on CPU, memory, or custom metrics from Azure Monitor. Azure App Service Autoscale applies to web apps and APIs on app service plans, scaling on a schedule or based on real-time load metrics. A practical example: an e-commerce SMB with heavy daytime traffic and minimal overnight activity can configure VMSS to run 4 instances during business hours and scale back to 1 instance overnight. If each instance costs $100 per month at continuous utilization, autoscaling that service cuts its effective compute cost by roughly 50% without any code changes. Setting up autoscaling rules that actually work. Getting autoscaling right requires a few specific steps. Define your baseline metrics: CPU threshold, request queue depth, or a custom application insights metric. Set a minimum instance count that covers guaranteed baseline traffic. Set a maximum instance count to cap unexpected cost spikes. Configure cooldown periods to prevent rapid scale-in and scale-out cycles. Test the rules under simulated load before pushing to production. One common mistake: setting the maximum instance count too high without a budget alert attached. Pair autoscaling with Azure Cost Management budget alerts to catch unexpected scaling events before they appear on your invoice. Right-sizing VMs to reduce cost in Azure Cloud. Right-sizing means choosing the smallest VM SKU that reliably handles your workload. Most SMB Azure environments run on VMs that are 2 to 4 times larger than they need to be, which directly inflates compute costs every single month. Azure Advisor, Microsoft's built-in recommendation engine, identifies underutilized VMs automatically. It flags any VM with average CPU utilization below 5% or network utilization below 2% over a 7-day window, then recommends a smaller SKU with an estimated monthly saving attached to the recommendation. Steps to start right-sizing today. Open Azure Advisor in the portal and click the Cost tab. Review the flagged VMs. Each recommendation shows the estimated monthly savings for that specific change. Schedule the resize during a maintenance window. Most VM resizes complete in 2 to 5 minutes with a brief restart. Monitor CPU and memory utilization for 1 week after resizing to confirm the workload stays within acceptable performance thresholds. For a typical SMB, right-sizing alone recovers 15 to 25% of monthly compute spend. Combined with reserved instances, the cumulative Azure cloud cost reduction reaches the 40% target reliably. Our Azure Cost Optimization Guide for SMBs includes right-sizing checklists and decision frameworks for the most common workload types. Azure Spot Instances use spare capacity at deep discounts. Azure Spot Instances give you access to unused Azure compute capacity at discounts of up to 90% compared to standard pay-as-you-go rates. The trade-off: Azure can evict Spot instances with 30 seconds notice when it needs the capacity back for higher priority workloads. This makes Spot instances unsuitable for stateful production applications. They work well for batch processing and ETL data pipeline CI/CD build agents in Azure DevOps video rendering and encoding jobs. Machine learning model training runs non-critical background and scheduled processing tasks for SMBs running nightly data pipelines or Azure DevOps build agents. Spot instances can cut compute costs for those specific workloads by 70 to 90%. Azure VMSS supports mixed instance policies, letting you blend standard and Spot VMs with automatic fallback to on-demand capacity when Spot availability drops in your region. This is the Azure cost-saving strategy with the highest percentage discount available, though it applies to a narrower slice of your workloads than reserved instances or right-sizing. Microsoft Azure Cost Optimization Tools every SMB should use. Microsoft provides several native tools to help you monitor, analyze, and control Azure cloud spending. Most SMBs are not using all of them, which means leaving free savings on the table. Azure Cost Management plus Billing. This is the primary dashboard for tracking spend across your Azure subscription. You can break down costs by resource group, service type, tag, or time period. Set up automated daily or weekly cost reports sent directly to your finance team. The Azure Cost Management plus Billing documentation covers every feature in detail, including budget creation and cost exports to storage. Azure Advisor. Beyond right-sizing VM recommendations, Advisor surfaces security, performance, and reliability improvements alongside cost savings. Checking it weekly takes about 10 minutes and consistently produces actionable changes. Our post on 7 proven Azure cost optimization tips for SMBs covers how to prioritize Advisor recommendations for maximum financial impact. Azure Monitor. Use Monitor to track resource utilization metrics over time. Combine it with Log Analytics workspaces to query usage patterns across your environment and identify resources consuming disproportionate spend relative to their business value. Cost allocation tags. Tags are metadata labels you attach to Azure resources, for example, or they let you break down your bill by business unit, project, or environment. Without tags in place, it is nearly impossible to determine which part of your business is driving cost growth month over month. How to set Azure budgets and spending alerts. Setting budget controls in Azure is a 2-part process. Create a budget, then attach alert thresholds to it. To create a budget in Azure, open Cost Management plus Billing in the Azure portal. Select Budgets and click Add. Choose the scope, subscription, resource group, or management group. Enter the monthly budget amount and the budget period. Add alert thresholds at 50%, 75%, 90%, and 100% of budget. Configure email recipients for each threshold alert. One important point: Azure budget alerts notify you when spending reaches a threshold, but they do not automatically stop resources. Enforcing hard limits requires combining budget alerts with Azure policy rules or automation workflows. If you already use Azure Logic Apps for business process automation, those same workflows can respond to cost alert webhooks and trigger resource deallocations automatically. Our guide on automating SMB compliance using Azure Logic Apps covers the automation patterns that apply directly to this use case. Stop cloud sprawl before it drains your Azure budget. Cloud sprawl is the uncontrolled accumulation of cloud resources, orphaned VMs, forgotten storage accounts, and used public IP addresses, and test environments that were never cleaned up. It is a silent cost drain that compounds every billing cycle. A few governance practices keep sprawl under control. Resource groups with clear ownership: each resource group should carry an owner tag and a defined review schedule. Automated shutdown policies: use Azure Automation Runbooks or Azure Policy to deallocate non-production VMs outside business hours. A dev VM running 8 hours a day instead of 24 costs 67% less. Resource creation policies: use Azure Policy to block expensive VM SKUs in development subscriptions and require tags on all new resources before creation is permitted. Regular resource audits: schedule a monthly Azure Resource Graph query to find orphaned managed disks, unattached public IPs, and storage accounts with no recent access activity. One commonly missed cost item: managed disks attached to deleted VMs. When you delete a VM in Azure, its managed disk persists by default and continues accruing storage charges indefinitely. A simple Azure Resource Graph query finds all unattached disks in your subscription in under a minute. Deleting them costs nothing and saves real money. Azure pricing tiers: picking the right option to cut cloud costs. Most Azure services offer multiple pricing tiers with significant cost and performance differences. Defaulting to the highest tier across the board is one of the most common and most fixable mistakes SMBs make when managing Azure cloud costs. Azure Files offers 4 performance tiers, each suited to different workload patterns. Transaction optimized: best for workloads with high transaction volume and moderate storage needs. Hot: general purpose shares accessed frequently by applications and users throughout the day. Cool: lower cost for shares accessed infrequently, ideal for backup and archive data. Premium: SSD-backed storage for latency-sensitive applications requiring consistent low-latency file access. Most SMBs default to Hot or Premium regardless of actual access frequency. Auditing file shares and moving infrequently accessed data to Cool reduces storage costs for those workloads by 30 to 50%. Azure Blob Storage offers Hot, Cool, Cold, and Archive tiers. Moving backup and compliance data from Hot to Archive cuts storage costs for that dataset by up to 90%. Azure Lifecycle Management policies automate tier transitions based on last access timestamps, removing the need for manual intervention and making the savings ongoing. For a detailed breakdown of tier selection across all major Azure storage services, see our tier-by-tier Azure Cloud Cost Optimization Guide. Building your Azure Cloud Cost Reduction Roadmap. A 40% reduction in Azure cloud costs is achievable for most SMBs, but it requires layering multiple strategies rather than relying on any single one. Here is how the savings stack looks in practice. Strategy: typical savings: reserved instances, 1 year. For stable compute, 30 to 40% on covered VMs, rightsizing underutilized VMs, 15 to 25% on compute, autoscaling for variable workloads, 20 to 50% on peak compute, spot instances for batch and CI/CD workloads, 70 to 90% on applicable compute, storage tier optimization, 30 to 90% on blob and file storage, deleting orphaned and idle resources, 5 to 15% of total bill. The biggest gains for most SMBs come from combining reserved instances with rightsizing, since those two strategies target the largest line items on a typical Azure bill. Autoscaling and spot instances layer incremental Microsoft Azure cost optimization savings on top for variable workloads. When all 6 levers are applied together, the SMB cloud cost reduction target of 40% is consistently within reach. Start with the strategies that require the least operational change, rightsizing via Azure Advisor and reserved instances for your top workloads, and work outward from there. Most SMBs see measurable savings within the first billing cycle after applying the first 2. Conclusion: Knowing how to reduce cost in Azure Cloud comes down to one core principle: pay for what you use, and use only what you need. Reserved instances eliminate the premium you pay for predictable workloads. Autoscaling stops you paying for idle capacity. Right-sizing removes the waste built into oversized VMs. Storage tier selection cuts costs on data you rarely access. Budget alerts keep you informed before surprises reach your invoice. Start with Azure Advisor this week. It costs nothing to run and surfaces your largest Azure Cloud cost savings opportunities immediately. Commit to reserved instances for your top 3 highest cost stable workloads, configure automated shutdown policies for all non-production environments, and audit your storage tiers. Those 4 actions alone move most SMBs well past the 30% savings mark, with the Microsoft Azure cost optimization discipline in place to go further. If you want hands-on support building a cost-optimized Azure architecture for your business, the Q Services team works with SMBs every day to design and implement Azure cost-saving strategies that deliver measurable results. Get in touch to start the conversation.